Why? Why am I here? Why, really, am I here? To forwardly subject myself to an experience so foreign from that of common life, I begged the question to myself of how deeply the place is from which this flows. Why need I take such seemingly extreme measures as renting out for 21 days a tiny off-grid cabin in the mountains of Colorado on a 700-acre plot of Tibetan Buddhist land? I've severed for the time being all connections to the outside world. No phone, no internet, no games, no luxuries, limiting myself to the resources of my own psyche, some books, and nature. I had a preliminary understanding of the work I felt I needed to do here, to purify, to deepen, to open. I was excited for the upcoming days, the novel everyday hurdles of living off-grid, and ready to take on the work that needed to be done. But I gravely underestimated the challenges that this solitary retreat would impose. Even after only the first full day, on my second night, the reality of my remote isolation in this alien environment overtook my sense of stability. I questioned my resolve, whether I could really do this. I don't know what time it is, but it's sometime in the middle of the night, and I just had one of the craziest and strangest sleep hole dream state experiences that I've ever had. And in the dream, I was seeing this space that I'm in right now and trying to make it out of my bed. And every time I stepped out of my bed, I'd teleport back in. I'd take 2 steps out of my bed and I'd teleport back in. And I don't know how I eventually got out, but I eventually woke up. I took a sip of water, I turned on some lights, and I was just spooked. And at first, when I first woke up, I was seriously questioning whether I could do this for 19 more days. If only after my first day of being here, I'm already transported into this transmuted reality where daydreams and nightmares are intermingling with concrete reality, then what's gonna happen in 19 more days? Though another bout of sleep wiped clear the almost delirium from my palate, and I awoke in the morning back on Earth, I tended to the simple necessities of my cabin and partook haphazardly in the practices called for by this retreat: reading, writing, meditating, walking. After I finished all of the things I thought I ought to do, my eyes widened in dispassionate belief about how much day was left. It felt longer than I remembered, and I questioned how on earth I ever felt there wasn't enough time. I couldn't make the sand fall fast enough. The vast emptiness of 7 full hours with nothing really to do loomed over me like an eternal limbo. If I were to remain sane in this tiny cabin, I would need a schedule to organize the day into not so daunting chunks. I made a schedule that would splice up the day into manageable bites. But the metallic irony is, I've never been good with adhering to the schedules I set for myself. Perhaps I'm too undisciplined, perhaps I'm meant to move more freely. Who knows? For the next 5 days, when the sun was high, after the passing of quiet morning, I felt the summer's heat burning inside of me. From the hollow vacuum of these days with their negative space emerged the ugly face of my unbridled humanity. I struggled against an impetuous current of restless agitation that made doing anything on my schedule almost impossible. Every single day I had to fight with a profound inner resistance. For 5 full days, I was filled with impatience, agitation, annoyance, aimlessness, density, disquiet, and ardent frustration. I could hardly sit still. I felt like a child in tantrum, furiously swiping away any objects of appeasement. It is the afternoon of day 6, and honestly, I am feeling fucking miserable. All day, I've just been miserable and anxious and agitated and impatient. And I'm in this weird mental, emotional place where I don't want to do anything, but I also can't stand to do nothing. And I have no external tools around me that I can use to help modulate or regulate my mental and emotional state. I can't call up a friend and say, hey, I'm feeling some type of way. Do you want to grab food and walk around? I have nothing around me of the sort. Yeah, I have my books and my notebook or whatever, but I've already read 100 pages in the last 36 hours. I've already written 10 pages in the last 36 hours. I've already done 2 asana sequences in the last 36 hours. And so the resources, the external resources that I have available to me, I feel like I've exhausted those. And so now I'm just sitting here like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with myself? Though finally on the 8th day, it seemed this struggle was coming to a yield. In the previous 3 days, I had read almost 2 entire books relating to Tibetan Buddhism, written by Lama Tsultrim Alyoni, the spiritual director of Terra Mandala, the center where I was doing my retreat. In one of the books, Wisdom Rising, Journey into the Mandala of the Empowered Feminine, I learned about the Tantric Buddhist idea of the Mandala of the 5 Dakinis. In short, this view of the world sees all phenomena composed of 5 fundamental elements: space, air, fire, earth, and water. This book offers a detailed account of each of the 5 qualities, their healthy and unhealthy manifestations within personality, and specific meditations for liberating oneself from their encumbered patterns. As I was reading this book, I felt like I was seeing a detailed account of the very inner struggle I fought against for so long. I often feel extremely heavy, emotionally frozen, energetically dense, withdrawn, fatigued, and caught up in my own foggy world. But on the other hand, at my best, I feel I can open myself to anyone and anything. I aspire to be spacious like the vast sky and hold within myself, in my heart, the whole world, with all of its beauty and suffering. This tension was the essential marking of the space element. I reflected on how I always resorted to brute force when trying to uproot this density. Coming into solitary retreat, it was my intention to, by an act of extreme effort, set in place new patterns of thought and action. But maybe I've been taking the wrong approach this whole time. Maybe I ought to take a step back from everything. Maybe I should allow myself to be completely in the emotional heat I've been trying to avoid for the last 5 days. Perhaps this emotional heat is the fire of purification, burning away all of the dead wood I've allowed to accumulate within me. And maybe I ought to let that process see itself through and allow these impurities to burn away. Perhaps my reading, writing, and spiritual practices were not supposed to be forceful acts of will, but an expression of my budding purification. I decided to do nothing, to stare at the ceiling if that's what I found myself doing, to lay with my eyes closed if that's where I was, to be with the horizon if that's where my gaze had been found. To my not-so-surprised delight, this subtle shift in perspective finally made me feel like I was settling in. On the 10th day, I broke open. The morning passed unencumbered as I read nearly half of In Love with the World, a monk's journey through the bardos of living and dying by esteemed meditation master Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. Though, during the midday, once again, I was filled to the brim with an unshakable feeling of stress and anxiety, which grew into an almost unbearable state. I became angry and upset. I furiously argued against the validity of certain Buddhist ideas that I held as fundamental to my worldview, and which led me to undertake this 21-day solitary retreat that was now feeling more like torture than retreat. I longed so painfully for my life out there that I wanted to rip my skin off and run as fast as I could back home. I was becoming overwhelmed and needed something to ground me. I remembered that the clinging of mind is the cause of suffering according to the Buddhists. Though I didn't know what it was exactly that I was clinging onto and which caused me so much stress. In Mingyur Rinpoche's book, I learned that the Tibetan Buddhists have a primary insistence on the idea of death and impermanence. We must let things go and let them die because change is the fundamental law of the universe. So often in life, we must allow ourselves to go through a psychological death in order to keep on living. I turned this over in my mind and realized that I had to let my life out there die. I wasn't taking a small detour with this retreat, only to go back and pick things up where they were left off. When I returned back to the world, I was going to be a new person, leading a new life. So I had to let the old me and my old life die. Impermanence and death and rebirth. This idea took home in my flesh. I sat outside on the patio of my cabin, humbly beneath the full moon, and tried to allow myself in each new moment to die into what is. Impermanence and death death and rebirth, dying into what is. Before the full moon, I widened my gaze to allow the full scope of the land to enter into my visual field. I tried to let my life out there die, the old me die, the me of each previous moment die, and to merge into my awareness, which held in its sight the earth, the moon, and the heavens. Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa. I chanted these Tibetan Buddhist mantras with small tears overflowing through my eyes. Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa. Impermanence and death, death and rebirth, dying into what is. I broke open. I felt a tangible difference in the quality of my awareness. I felt as if I could touch the truth of naked existence, as a child touching the sea for the first time. I felt in touch with the quality of existence as such, without a layer of ego or thought in between. I felt a raw intimacy with the eternal isness that exists beneath all of the fluctuating forms of mind and matter. I felt more and more anchored into a timeless non-space as I transformed in each new moment. Bum Hari Nisa, Bum Hari Nisa. Impermanence and death, death and rebirth, dying into what is. Eventually, I felt as though I had done enough, so I went inside to sleep, to dream, to be an abstract consciousness. What is up, everybody? I hope you guys have enjoyed the video thus far. That 10th day that I had there was extremely profound and intense, and the 11th day that I had after I went to sleep was even more intense. So I wanted to get out of the video framework and talk like this a little bit more personally about that experience. So on my 11th day, I woke up and I still felt extremely lucid, and I felt very high. I went about my morning as I did